January 19th, 2021. I'm just going to ask, if you are not speaking, if you could mute yourself so we can reduce the feedback. And to get us started, Cammie, can you please call the roll?
Ms. Aronson?
Environment that helps them develop into strong-minded and resilient people with potential beyond measure for a successful future. This especially holds true when faced with anticipated and unforeseen challenges. This is what our youth deserve, and it is their right.
The West Hartford Public School System speaks about clear paths, bright futures, no limits. We stand by this. We mean what we say and say what we mean. No exceptions. Part of our role is to educate our youth and their families about civic engagement. And for Board of Education issues, we encourage people to comment at the beginning and end of board meetings, to email us or contact us by mail or phone. That is how we encourage our youth, their families, and our community to share their ideas and questions with us. And we encourage them to use similar processes for other governing bodies. Thank you. And so therefore, without any further ado, we will move to public communications. We have had 2 members of our community. Yes. Yep. No worries. Can I have sort of a signal from folks if you would like me to repeat? We can start over. A little head nod or?
Any objections to us starting over?
Thank you. Well done. Okay. And again, this is a statement on behalf of all board members. To the youth, parents, caregivers, educators, and residents of West Hartford, we are speaking to you, recognizing all that has occurred and you have been exposed to most recently in our country. Our collective responsibility as Board of Education members, among other things, is to establish policies and ensure they are being followed.
However, it is our charge to promote and protect the healthy social, emotional, and academic development of our youth. In doing so, we cannot expect our youth to operate in silos of existence. We cannot expect our youth to unknow what they know is happening around them, or unsee what they've seen. What we can expect from our youth is for them to trust that we as a collective body are invested in each and every one of them. What we can expect from our youth is for them to know that we are committed to promoting an equitable educational environment that helps them develop into strong-minded and resilient people with potential beyond measure for a successful future. This especially holds true when faced with anticipated and unforeseen challenges. This is what our youth deserve, and it is their right.
The West Hartford Public School System speaks about clear paths, bright futures, no limits. We stand by this. We mean what we say and say what we mean, no exceptions. Part of our role is to educate our youth and their families about civic engagement. For Board of Education issues, we encourage people to comment at the beginning and end of board meetings, to email us, or to contact us by mail or phone. That is how we encourage our youth, their families, and our community to share their ideas and questions with us, and to use similar processes for other governing bodies. Thank you. All right, now we're going to move to public comment by members of the public. We'll start with those who have signed up. As a reminder, board members do not respond to comments or questions posed during this period. The comments are restricted to 3 minutes per individual. And I will ask first for Natalie De La Cruz to address us. Good evening, Natalie.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes.
All right, awesome. Thank you. So, hello, my name is Natalie De La Cruz. I live at 8 Ridgebrook Drive. I'm a senior at Conard, and I'm Conard's Student Council President. First of all, that was an amazing statement, so thank you so much for that. I've been really impressed with not only the Martin Luther King Jr. Day celebration, but also the response to current events that WHPS has had. I also would like to say that Hybrid 2.0 is functioning much better from a learning standpoint than the original hybrid schedule did. I was very happy and impressed with everyone's ability to switch over to live streaming, and I think that considering our circumstances, it satisfies students and teachers' needs. However, in terms of physical safety, there are still some concerns. In a poll conducted by the Student Council of 100 Conard students, 72 of them said that they did not feel safe being in the building the weeks following winter break. I polled some hall students as well and found similar results, coupled with extreme discontent at the fact that students saw others traveling and hanging out in groups, and yet were still asked to come into school right after. I'm aware that other districts were virtual during those weeks, and I'm still extremely disappointed that West Hartford Public Schools did not make the decision to do something similar. So I urge you, please consider making the week after spring break virtual for all. We do not feel safe or comfortable going into school. Thank you.
Thank you. Next, I'd like to call on Jonathan Schultz.
Hi.
Welcome, Jonathan.
Hi, thank you very much for having me. My name is Jonathan Schultz. I was calling specifically about the new UK B.1.1.7 mutation for the coronavirus. In the UK, they found this mutation to be about 50% more transmissible. And while they were originally having successful in-person schools before this mutation took over, it got so bad to the point where they had to shut down all of the schools in the country, and a lot of teachers got hurt. My question is basically, we haven't heard anything from the schools or from the state about this, and it's a variant that's been found in the state, and some projections say that it should be the main COVID variant in a couple months. According to the leading indicators or risk indicators on your website, West Hartford's been in the medium risk level for the last couple months, or moderate risk level, and the high risk level for the past 3 weeks. In the logistics and operational plan from before the schools were reopened, it said, and I quote, "If it is determined that there is a moderate transmission risk, we will operate at significantly reduced capacity while maintaining health and safety protocols." Talking about going hybrid or even going fully remote. And I know you guys can't comment about this, so I was more just calling to bring it to your attention of, what changed. There's been no public statements at all about if you've decided that these are now safe or what, but it seems to be not following the guidance that happened originally. Otherwise, specifically, the elementary schools are fully in person, whereas I know some of the other ones are remote or hybrid. And the elementary schools, they've found that the new variant is just as much of a transmission jump in children as it is in adults. So, just putting everybody at risk. Thank you very much. That was all I had.
Thank you. We don't have anyone else who's signed up. Is there anybody who's called in to provide public comment? Okay. All right, we will move on to unfinished business. We don't have any unfinished business. We're going to move on to item 4, new business, and A, the presentation of the capital improvement plan for 2021-2022. And the recommendation is that the Board of Education receive the capital improvement plan for 21-22 and begin the process of reviewing for final approval and adoption at our next Board of Education meeting. So I think I'm turning this over first to Tom and then to some of our others.
Yeah, and I'll turn it over to Andy and Bob and Liz quickly. This meeting kind of is the kickoff to the budget process, because the CIP is a separate piece of the budget, but it's a budget that you will vote on. Then tonight we also have long-term enrollment trends to kind of give you a piece of where we are. In mid-February, I've decided I'm going to do a kind of state of the schools report to look at where we are now versus 5 years ago and 20 years ago, so we can have a little bit of historical context and challenges that are coming up. And then the first week in March, we'll present the budget to you, which I don't know about you, Liz, that just made my heart jump thinking that that's only a few weeks away. So that's where we are now, and this kind of kicks us off. And the CIP really lists our priorities for the school buildings. And what I say to people all the time is the difficulty of the CIP in West Hartford is a lot of the times you don't see the spending because it's on things that maintain the masonry of the building, repointing masonry, it's roofs, it's boiler systems. In the past few years, you have seen some of the spending as we've spent a lot on security enhancements. Obviously, one of the big concerns that's been highlighted that we've put into the CIP now, I'm pretty sure every year we've been here with ventilation concerns and how can we get that? And it has been postponed at times. And I think with coronavirus and the impact and the interest in our ventilation systems, I do think it has certainly taken on a greater priority. And I'll let Andy and Bob and Liz, thank you so much. And just as a background for the CIP, we meet and go through the buildings, and Bob meets with the head custodians of the building to look at the physical plants, to look at what's necessary. Andy goes out, talks to the principals so that we can prioritize because there are some things, and there are also some community aspects of our schools. King Philip for years, and I know Mark brought this up years ago as a voting site, the handicapped access and the parking areas, that became a priority for paving, just to make sure that voting is smoothly there. So there's a few different considerations we take into account. So with that, Andy.
All right. Good evening, everyone. So I'm going to walk you through a little bit. You have the capital improvement plan in front of you, hopefully, and had a chance to look through. I'm going to walk through and hit some of the highlights. I'm going to turn it over to Bob, who is going to make masonry exciting for you because that is his passion. So as Tom had said, this is really the kickoff for our budget cycle, and it includes appropriations for the next fiscal year and then 2022-23. We always look at the CIP in a 2-year appropriation. And so when you then go ahead and review and approve this on the 2nd, it goes to the town and it's incorporated as part of the town of West Hartford's capital improvement plan because it is one document there. And so One of the things that was a little bit different for us this year, as you remember back to, it seems years ago, but back into the spring and some of the uncertainty that we had going into the summer as we were working through the early stages of the pandemic, it seemed. And at the request of the town manager and the town council, some of our projects were postponed because they were unsure at that point about some of the fiscal issues in town. And so we were able to accomplish a limited number of projects using some of our funding and some of our carryover. But we do have some funding in reserve that we've then allocated and planned for this upcoming summer when we have a fair amount of work planned. So just some of the projects that we're able to complete, obviously, we continued our replacement of computer hardware. We continued limited replacement of furniture, which is just a yearly thing that we do as furniture needs to be replaced. We completed the hall and the Sedgwick masonry repairs. You may remember driving past over the summer, past Sedgwick, and seeing the scaffolding up again. That's the pinning of the bricks that has to be done. We replaced the Smith's floor replacement, and we completed the paving up at Norfeld. One of the things that is really the most I think the most important work that we've been doing over about the past 5 years is we've been reworking all of our schools' entranceways to provide secure entry into situations that allow what's considered a man-trap entrance, where there is that double entrance into schools where someone has to be buzzed in, has to be acknowledged in through a main office instead of just walking in. And so we were able to complete that at Bugby. If you remember, Bugby was a 2-year project. We were able to complete the new office and entry at Bugby. And we were also able to complete the new entrance and office at Brayburn and at Smith. And so when all of this is lifted and you're actually able to go and see different schools and go into the schools, I would encourage you to go in there and really get a sense of how the schools function so much better and they're so much more secure now. We were also able to remove the 2 modulars at Whiting Lane. If you remember, this has been an ongoing situation as we've been able to really decommission and not need these spaces. We're able to tear them down. Many cases before they fell down of their own accord. One of the things that we also had talked about is, as Tom had mentioned, is looking at the air quality in the schools. And last year we had addressed a program that was going to begin and will begin in the 22-23 fiscal year. If there is anything that came out of this pandemic and some of the planning, it's, if you remember back in the beginning of all of this, the state came out with guidance that said, as part of the reopening of buildings, they encouraged districts to go ahead and do an HVAC assessment that really commissioned and looked at all of the systems in all of their buildings. And so this was something that we did. This was a multi-month project that we did. It was about $250,000, give or take, between the engineers. That's not including our people then going in and doing the work and the balancing as well. But the benefit of that is that it really gave us a solid understanding of our systems. And it's done a lot of some of the groundwork that's going to enable us to be better prepared when we start next year in replacing and evaluating systems and at the elementary schools. And Bob will talk a little bit more about that. Some of the projects that we have for next year, you can see, in addition to some of the exterior work, we have work being done for playgrounds. We have the bleacher replacement at Conard, which we've been pushing forward now for a number of years. We have the security completions. Our remaining schools will be completed, and we have programs and plans in place for Whiting Lane, for Wolcott, for Duffy, for Norfeld, and for KP. Some of them are relatively easy fixes. Some are a little more involved that require more of an office reconfiguration, like we've had to do in some of the other schools. And so I'm going to turn it over to Bob, who can walk through the projects and then give an overview of where we're headed. Bob, you want to?
Sure. Thank you, Andy. So, so for the planned projects for the next 3 years, I've listed those out on page 3, and I'll just briefly go through those. So for Brayburn, we're looking to do a roof replacement this upcoming summer. The following summer, we would come in and reconstruct the parking lot, the main parking lot there. Bugby, this coming summer, we are looking to do repave the basketball playground, also replace some exterior doors as part of the security project. The following year, we would look to do a boiler replacement project and also to replace a section of the roof in that building. For this upcoming summer, for Conard, we have a holdover project from the visitor bleacher replacement from last year. We're going to do some flooring replacement and some painting. We have restroom renovations planned for the summer after that, next summer after this one. So as Andy had talked about for Duffy, we're looking at main entrance security work this summer. Next summer would begin the fresh air and window project. Duffy would be our first building. We anticipate it would take 2 years to complete that project based on the size of the building and our limited time window during the summer in order to complete that work. And then the second summer, we would look at doing some flooring and painting also. So for Hall, we had postponed last year the culinary kitchen renovation. That's back on track for this summer. We also had postponed part of our partial roof replacement. We're going to combine that with this year's roof replacement that was planned for this year to make one project. We have ongoing masonry repairs, as Andy and Tom have spoken about, just necessary work to keep water from penetrating the buildings and to protect the interior of the building. Auditorium seating, again, was postponed from last year, will be restarted this year. We also are planning on doing some flooring and painting at Hall. And also restroom renovations. So King Philip, boiler modifications. We originally had planned, if you recall last year's capital improvement plan, to replace the entire steam boiler system and all the piping system at King Philip. We thought we had it designed, we put it out to bid. It came in substantially higher than we wanted it to be, to the point of where it didn't make economic sense to do it. So what we're going to do is maintain, and really what was the driver of that is replacing the piping systems throughout the building. And as you know, King Philip, as we often refer to it as King Philip International Airport because it's so sprawling. The piping repairs replacement was just going to be extensively expensive to do. So it really didn't cost justify the replacement. So we're going to make some modifications to the boiler system there to keep the steam boiler in place. Those are some modest improvements, and that'll give us a good solid 10 years on that boiler system there. And then what we're going to do is take that money that we would have spent on the boiler system and replace the auditorium air handler. That during what Andy had spoken about our HVAC evaluation, that really came to light as being a problem unit that's not functioning very well and not doing a very good job of providing fresh air into that auditorium. So we'll replace that this coming summer. As Andy mentioned, we're also working on some main security improvements. We have auditorium seating planned there for this summer and the following summer. That would be a 2-year project. We also have exterior door replacements as part of the security project. We're planning to come back and do some flooring and painting the summer after this. And then in the third year, we would do some additional paving on the back side of the building, so the back driveway. For Norfelt, we postponed the flooring project from last year. That'll go forward this summer. We'll come back in the third year and do that again. Same thing with painting. As Andy mentioned, entrance security will be coming this summer, and we'll also replace some of the playground equipment. So for Sedgwick, we, again, postponed project from last year was a roof replacement. We'll come back and do that. We'll continue with our masonry repairs this year. And then in the third year, we're going to skip a year over there due to funding restrictions. And then we'll also have a 2-year project starting this year. And again, in the third year to renovate some of the restrooms in the older sections of the building. Webster Hill, for this coming summer, we plan on doing some flooring replacement and painting. The parking lot will be redone next summer. And then again, next summer, we'll replace the boilers at that building. Whiting Lane, postponed from last year, is the main entrance security project. We'll also do some exterior door replacements in association with that. And then in the second year, we'll come back and do flooring and painting. So we had postponed some minor changes for security there. We'll do that this summer. We also have some playground equipment scheduled for this summer and for the third year to replace some of the equipment there. And also in the third year to replace some of the auditorium seating. So, so that's really the projects that we have for the next 3 years. You know, and the priorities are pretty much the same. We're always trying to be consistent in our approach and to do work in all the buildings and be fair and equitable and to address the needs of each building. And as Andy had talked about, the fresh air system is coming up. That'll start next summer, not this coming summer. And that's a long-term program, just like most of these are. It's to address the fresh air systems in our buildings that do not have fresh air systems, which are 7 of our 11 elementaries have virtually no fresh air systems. And then 2 have limited fresh air systems, and then 2 others have fresh air and air conditioning. So, you know, and as Andy had talked about, we had hired a consultant to come through our buildings. They evaluated our HVAC systems for efficiency, make sure they were functioning correctly, but also to help us to adjust them so that we could maximize our fresh air in the building. So, and I think they did a great job. It was a lot of work on their part. We really learned a lot more about our systems and how they're operating and what their capabilities are and where the deficiencies are, certainly. And as Andy said, that's given us a really good benchmark of where to start our process on these buildings as we begin that process of improving the HVAC, the fresh air systems and window replacements. So at this point, I can certainly turn it back to you guys for any questions.
Great, thank you. So if board members have questions, we put a question mark in the chat box, and we'll start with Amanda.
Hi, thank you. Thank you very much, Bob. You always give a very thorough report and really solid background information, so it's nice for us to be able to review that ahead of time. Thank you. Have you run into any challenges with supplies or with contractors needing to change things based on COVID-related issues?
Yeah. So last summer was very challenging, even though we had scaled back substantially on the number of projects. The supply chain in the manufacturing process were substantially interrupted, and they continue to be. So, so we expect to have challenges in getting materials this summer for some of these projects, especially the security projects. A lot of this is specialty glazings and glasses, those types of specialty items. So, you know, the manufacturers are experiencing problems with COVID in their workplace, having to separate employees and people who are out because of illness, just like we're experiencing in our lives as well. So we did see substantial interruption. There was also, there was quite a few natural disasters last summer too, which also interfered with the distribution nationwide. So yeah, so we saw problems with that. We'll probably see it again this year too.
So how firm are you, or how comfortable are you with these numbers for the budgeting purposes? Is there, I know you try not to build a lot of excess into anything, but is there some room in some of these? Because I imagine that's not all information that you'll be able to understand clearly immediately. It's just out of
we really don't know until we go to bid, and we're just beginning the process right now to go to bid to see what the market is like. I did have a conversation with our architect who's working on our roofing projects this morning. He's seeing lower than expected bid prices for roofing projects because companies are looking for work. So we thought that might be the case last summer too. We didn't experience that, but he has did a few projects so far, public municipal projects, roofing projects, and they've come in, you know, way below budget. So it's nice to see that. So for at least right now, that's where it seems where it's heading, but there's, you know, it's hard to tell.
And Amanda, if I can add, we've got a pretty good understanding with projects like the security projects and some of the office work and some of the playground work that we've done simply because we've done it a number of times. And so we've got a pretty good understanding of where those budgets are going to come in. But again, we'll see, and it's always a surprise. And if we have to adjust, we adjust and go from there.
And would you be able to just expound a little bit on what the renovations are for the restrooms? I don't remember that part from last year.
Sure, yeah. So at Hall High School, we will look at the restrooms adjacent to the auditorium, across from the main office. They're pretty much original. We did some work in those in the last 7 or 8 years just to kind of refurbish them
7
a
years
little bit.
ago, we redid the flooring and some of the stall work, but it needs to be done.
Yeah, so they really need a full renovation. Same thing over at Conard. We're going to be focusing on the restrooms that are closest to the auditorium, cafeteria, and gym. Again, those are the most publicly used restrooms in the building, so those are the ones that we're going to focus on for right now.
Mark?
Oh, can you hear me?
Yep.
Yeah.
Yep.
So, hey, Bob, thanks. The projects, one thing, the fresh air and windows at Duffy's definitely needed. We've talked about that for years. But what is there anything in here that is a huge driver, and what's the biggest driver going from out? Because if you look at, that's 2029, but I'm just trying to get an idea where, if there's any drivers that, and then I always ask this question too, is can we redirect some of those fundings for the security so that those projects get done first?
We should be okay on the security projects, Mark. The ones that we have remaining are the ones that we've budgeted for. It's just a couple of the elementaries left. And so I think we're feeling pretty comfortable about that. If you remember last year, we also included additional funding in the CIP for security for the mandate for the visual emergency notification systems that we're in the process of putting in to each of the buildings as well. So I think we're in pretty good shape and feel pretty comfortable about the security. If I understand your question right, you're looking at like the out years and the escalation there. And I don't believe there's anything more than just an inflationary number that's built in as we go into those out years.
That's correct, Andy. I was just going to say from an inflationary aspect, we look at an increase of approximately 3% per year as the total. So if you look at the recurring projects, you'll see that when we get out to 32, 33, our recurring projects are still only 7.7 million. But what you're seeing is the increase as we go out further with the elementary schools and the different schools that we'll be doing. Those costs are increasing approximately 3% as well over the term of this CIP.
Yeah.
But no new projects. It's really just inflationary increases.
Okay. Yeah, that's actually kind of the number I was looking at, and it's fine. So we have a decrease from 2021 to 2022, right? Last year we had 7.7. Am I reading this correctly? Are we looking at the 5.3 number?
Nope, you are reading it correctly. And
right.
the reason for the decrease, as Andy had said, we had added an additional $1 million last year to address some security issues that we thought were very important and timely that needed to be done. So it is actually a reduction from the prior year.
Okay, thank you.
Liz?
Hi, sorry, I dropped, my connection was lost for a minute, so I'm not sure if anyone asked about this, but I just wanted to comment about the bleacher project over at Conard. And I think I heard that it's going to be completed this summer. And I do think that's a really necessary project. After spending some time on those bleachers, it seems to me that should definitely be a priority to get that done. And also, I was wondering, the way that that's set up now, there's no way to walk up. There's no center aisles, or you have to just walk right up the actual bleachers. Is that going to be remedied when you redo it?
Yes. Yep. That's one of the main reasons, that and just the age. is one of the reasons we're redoing it. So it'll be similar to what the home side is now, where it's accessible.
Okay, good.
That's an area where, I mean, Bob would be with me and Andy. Bleacher costs have gone up dramatically from what we budgeted
Incredible.
a few years ago to now. And as such, our capacity in the bleachers has gone down a little bit. So when people ask, why is Hall's capacity so much larger than Conard's? It's because their bleachers were built earlier when they were way cheaper.
Yeah, the aluminum market is out of control right now. In fact, Coca-Cola and Pepsi can't even deliver the amount of beverages they have because of the aluminum market.
Yep.
And then we cut, yeah, it seems like we cut a break, with the sports not being, or fan capacity being down this year. So kind of makes sense to have put that off. But I do think that it's a good thing to move on that one.
Other questions? Just a question from me then. Given that we're only halfway through the year and we have a clearer picture now of our finances as a town and as a state, is there any chance of adding anything back in that we approved last year that got delayed?
We are, so everything that was delayed, that was deferred from last year is happening this year. So everything is rolling forward. So everything that
Right. I'm saying instead of rolling it forward to next year, is there any chance of getting it done this spring?
We do have stuff in progress right now, so some things are happening, but unfortunately the buildings are mostly occupied, and most of the work we can't do with students in the building. So, but things that we can do, we will do. So,
yeah, I was thinking of playgrounds, something like that is like a nice thing for our kids to have an area to play outside if possible.
Yeah, but unfortunately they're in use. That's where most of the activity is now, outside.
Yeah.
Gotcha.
Bob,
Any other?
Well, I know
sorry,
we could go full remote so we can get the buildings empty for you and we can get projects done.
There you go.
We thought that was going to work out for us in the spring, Mark, if you remember, and then we ran into supply issues. So,
right.
Does anyone else have any questions about? Oh, sorry, Tom. Go ahead.
No, the only other thing I do want to thank Bob and Liz while they're here with us about CIP, because don't forget, we had a massive amount of spending structurally on outdoor equipment, on outdoor cafeteria areas, of outdoor classrooms, of changing the way we cleaned, of massive training of our custodians to change the things that we do. So this past year, I mean, I can't thank Bob enough for the work that he's led, and Liz in how she's managed our spending to be able to do that and prioritize things, as you said, Deb, to make sure they get done, and doing them. There's a lot of things that we did early on, kind of taking a flyer. We think we're going to need to do this, and we did get it. Well, there are districts that still haven't done their analysis of their air filters because there's not enough companies that do it, and they're still holding off on that. And we basically had it done either before the start of the year or within the first couple of weeks of the school year, other than some follow-up. So I just wanted to take the chance now to thank Bob and Liz for all their work with this, because it's been a massive undertaking this year, and Bob's people have done just, I'm proud to have them as colleagues.
Thank you.
Thank you. All right. So looks like we are all out of questions for this one. We'll talk about it again at our next meeting in February. So thank you very much for your presentation. We will move on to item B, adoption of the annual board meeting schedule for 21-22. And I'm looking for a motion for the Board of Education to review and revise, I guess I'm looking for a motion for us to adopt the final meeting calendar for the 2021-22 school year. Do I have a motion?
So moved. Ari
Thank you,
Steinberg.
Ari. Is there a second?
Second.
Jason Chang.
Thank you, Jason, for seconding that. And Tom, will you walk us through this?
Sure.
So thank you.
Yeah, we established the board meeting dates always at this point in January for the following year's calendar. really, when you look at next year's calendar, there's a few Wednesdays in there as we see when there's conflicts with the town council or when there's elections or there's budget workshops or public hearings, which we might have on Wednesdays. The one kind of thing that jumps out for next year that's a little bit different, and it's happened before. If you look at the school calendar, which has already been adopted, Rosh Hashanah happens very early in the year, actually the day after Labor Day, which would typically be our first board meeting. So we're not going to have a board meeting that night. That Wednesday night, there's a conflict. So what's happened, what we've done before, because it's so early in the year and there's not a lot that's happened then as we go to the third meeting. If people wanted to have back-to-back meetings, you could change that, but that's just what we've done in the past when we've had an issue with either Rosh Hashanah or Yom Kippur like that at the beginning where there's one September meeting. So other than that, it's pretty much your standard board meeting calendar.
Are there any questions? If not, I will try your minds. All those in favor of approving the annual board meeting schedule for 21-22, please signify by saying aye. Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed, say nay. Any abstentions? The ayes have it, and the motion is approved, and the board meeting schedule is adopted. Thank you. All right, we are moving on to staff communications and reports, and we'll start with the superintendent's report.
Sure. I want to start by thanking Jen Evans and WHC-TV, West Hartford Cable and Community Interactive. I always get it mixed up now that it's changed. I always just think WHC-TV. But their work partnering with us to broadcast the Martin Luther King Jr. presentation yesterday, and the program, once again, an inspiring day with great speakers, and the work that's gone into that, and just a really kind of hallmark event for being in West Hartford. And I was a little concerned with it without it being in person. And this is, I thought it was tremendous and just a different way of doing it, but it was great. So thanks to all of our music groups and all the people that had a piece in the planning of that, because it was a inspiring day to be in West Hartford and put a good charge to all of us moving forward. I want to talk a little bit about, well, a couple just updates. Sports practices began today under the Department of Public Health advisory for moderate risk level and low risk level sports. I've had some questions. Why wouldn't indoor track occur? One of the biggest things with indoor track is there's only basically like 2 sites where you can have meets, where public schools have meets in Connecticut, New Haven and Glastonbury. Both those sites can't be used for meets right now. So that's one of the major drivers of that not having. That does mean our kids can't go outside and run as they did in the fall and will in the spring. And so that's been going on. And luckily we've had so far, knock on wood, a winter that hasn't seen a ton of snow and ice and precipitation. And let's hope that continues over the next 6 weeks or so, as we need that kind of a year this year. So planning with, return to school, we had questions. I do want to share, there is some good news. While we are concerned with variants, and we met this morning with the State Department of Public Health, and we've said all along we'll follow what the Department of Public Health tells us to do. We'll make decisions based on their guidance. And actually, since we've returned to school, I think you've noticed a decline of number of school cases from what we saw in November and December. And I don't want to make pronouncement yet. It's only been a couple weeks, but as the state numbers spiked a little bit, West Hartford's numbers and test positivity rate sat kind of in the 4s. We've seen an increase in a uptick in numbers again. But if you notice the letters from Andy Home last week about number of cases in the schools, which typically reflect our community spread, that had actually, we saw a bit of a decline last week. And hopefully that continues over the coming weeks. I had hoped, and we met last week with West Hartford Health District, and we've been trying to plan out how we will do vaccination clinics for all of our employees, which, if we did all the vaccinations, it would be, between 1,500 and 2,000 vaccinations. And, we're getting ready for that. And, today, the governor released his plans for Group 1B, and it looks like that won't start till the end of February, the beginning of March. So it's a little, I won't pretend I'm not disappointed. I wish we had more vaccines. I think that the best way that we can get back in out of hybrid is if our teaching staff and our building staff has been vaccinated. But we can look at that also is in conjunction with what the numbers do. And if the numbers continue to see their decline, we're all committed, as we have been, to move out of hybrid as soon as we can reasonably. And I've had some people say, but we haven't seen the spread in the schools. And while that's true, we haven't. I also want to say we've had strict mitigation efforts, both in the number of kids we've had in and in our mask wearing. And you'll see some neighboring districts that may be moving away from hybrid. In some cases, they haven't been in school since Thanksgiving, and then they're coming back, moving right away from hybrid. Why can't we move away from hybrid? The biggest difference in West Hartford that I hope people can understand is they're moving out of hybrid with only 50% of their kids in school to start with. So it's really their hybrid is 25% of the kids. We've got at our secondary levels between 10 and 15% that are remote. So we're talking about 90% of our kids. We're still at 45% of our kids in school while we're in hybrid. All that being said, I'd like to plan out and look at, over the next few weeks, really looking at our numbers and trying to make plans. And I am committed before the end of this school year, we will be back out of hybrid if it's safe, if we can make those accommodations, and if we don't see spikes from a different variant or things like that. But we're working on that now. I think that, I don't think we'll see lunches served at the high school this year. I think our schedule, if everybody's back, would look like what it looks like now at the middle school and high school, where we'd have grab and go and dismissal. So you don't have that setting with 400 kids together in a cafeteria, as we don't have now with 200 kids in the cafeteria. There's been some confusion about vaccines. Some teachers have said, why didn't you upload us into the system? No, the VAM system, we uploaded all of our nurses. They were part of Group 1A. And some districts uploaded their whole system and hadn't tested it. Andy and I tested our system, and we saw right away, anytime you're doing a rollout like that, we put our own 2 names in, and we saw a week and a half ago that if we did that, we could have made appointments the next day. And, the advice, the charge from the state had been, do not just load everybody into VAMs. So we didn't. And so while there are some districts that did, and some teachers made individual appointments, we saw that you could do that, which is why we didn't do that, because we would have glutted a system with 2,000 people taking tests before there's an allotment, and before people over 75 have. Now they're putting people over 65 in that next group, and then us. And I don't make the decisions about when people get there, what groups are prioritized or anything like that. But I do think it's important that we wait our turn. I think that I don't just think this is really kind of a decision like there's a mistake. There was an ethical question that I don't think there is. Trust me, I want this vaccine so badly. And seeing my name with an appointment next to it, and all I had to do was click, I wanted to do that badly. But this is something we all have to kind of make these choices. So I may not be as forgiving as some people about those mistakes, in all honesty, because we are a community. We have to work together. And we can, as a state, move dramatically forward once teachers are vaccinated and how we look at how we operate our schools. But when you look at mortality rates for people that are older, I can't really justify having put people forward that would take appointments away from our grandparents. So that's where we are with that. So there are some people that are kind of mad. Why didn't you just load us all in there? And it's because we weren't supposed to. That was the rule. But there was also, I think Andy and I both saw what would happen if we did. So, moving forward, hope to get those vaccines out end of February, beginning of March. The sooner the better. We've got plans with the West Hartford Health District about how we can vaccinate everybody over a relatively short period of time. But of course, teachers will be able to make their own appointments too under the system if they don't want to wait for our clinics, but we'll try to do those just as we do flu clinics. So if there's any questions, that's the report from me.
Do any board members have questions? If so, put a question mark in the chat box. Amanda?
Hi, thank you, Tom. You mentioned at the very beginning of your remarks about the program for Dr. King, and I just wanted to take a moment to mention that really showcased a number of things that were special, but seeing all the different ways our music teachers are working with the kids in the spaces, that was important for the community to see. And then also what you mentioned about our coaches. I don't know that publicly as a board we've really taken enough time to talk about our music teachers and our coaches and how much they're doing and how much flexibility they've been offering to the community. So I just wanted to say thank you. And could you just talk a little bit about the news and any mutations, because people are wondering about that and what kind of direction you're getting from the health district?
The health district has said we move forward as we do, and we use the same mitigation strategies. And if the mitigation strategies worked previously, they should continue to work. Whether it's more contagious, the information about how it relates with children, that it's been too soon for there to be dramatic conclusions made from it. There was an article today about it being in California that actually challenged some of those assertions. But again, it's way too early to make those decisions. So we'll take the advice from the health district and the state epidemiologist as we move forward. We're certainly keeping an eye on it. And if the health district tells us you need to make changes because of this or become more conservative somehow, we will. But that is not their advice currently.
Ari?
I just had a quick question, and this may have been answered in the past, but I just wanted clarification. I'm all about getting out of hybrid sooner than later. But I was wondering, what is the district's commitment to the remote school? Is the intention for that to remain regardless of what kind of the hybrid model does? Is that a commitment to the families that are in remote?
I'm glad you brought it up, Ari, because I should have made that clear, because sometimes people question if that means something's going to happen to our remote learning. And that's just going to exist throughout this year. I think it's safe to say at this point, being in late January, that for the people that elected that, there's not going to be enough vaccinations across the state or for children and families to make that go away this year. So no, that'll exist through June, and hopefully just this June and not next year. So
thank you.
Yeah, thanks for bringing that up.
Mark?
Tom, do you see, say we all go back to school September out of hybrid, and now it's winter time. Do you see the remote learning transferring as the governor did for COVID, for snow days, as we voted on? Do you see that continuing year after year?
We just had this conversation today with a large group of superintendents, and that'll be something we'll wait to hear from the state. So I don't know yet. Like a lot of people think it has already been pushed into further years. It's not. That was just a this year solution. So I'm sure that'll be addressed by the State Board of Ed at some point, probably later this spring, in the summer, or maybe next fall. We'll get more information, but that would be after a new commissioner were in place, assuming that.
Do you have an opinion on it? Is there, what are other superintendents talking about, taking advantage of it, not taking advantage of it?
It's kind of split just the way it was. I mean, I think after you voted with 2 days, I think you saw that model copied in some places. But you have other districts that have said no snow days whatsoever, and other districts that haven't made any changes. So I think it's kind of all over the place. I don't think there's one voice. I think people would want the option, certainly. I think having the option is something that will be pressed to the State Board of Education. Especially, you want to be able to react in case we have that winter like we did in 2013, where you're just snowfall after snowfall after snowfall.
Any other questions? All right, thank you. So we will move on to staff reports and board discussions, and we have a multi-year enrollment projections. And pleased to welcome back to our board meeting Chip Ward and Liz Hewitt.
I'm so glad you were able to bring Chip back. For those of you that don't know Chip Ward was Liz Hewitt before Liz Hewitt, and Chip worked here for many, many years. Chip's done long-term enrollment projections, multi-year enrollment projections, and with Liz with enough things on her plate, with COVID and everything else, we decided continue to bring Chip back, do these long-term trends, and I think Chip will, not to jump in anywhere, it's always difficult, and this year's more difficult than ever to do this. But with that, Mr. Ward.
Well, good evening, everybody. Let me see if I can get everything set up for the presentation. And so let me just start this. All right, and now let me get back.
If I knew Chip was going to be on, I would have wore a tie.
But you see, I'm not in the tie.
I know.
That is one thing about these Zoom meetings. All right, let's get back here. And now I can present my screen. Present a screen. Does it pick which screen? Oh, good. There we go. Share.
After years of Chip doing all the technology for people, I was really hoping you'd have to ask for Vicinus's help with this, but no, he didn't.
This is I've never presented in Google Meet, so it's like, oh, very cool. All right. So anyway, hopefully you're seeing a screen that says multi-year enrollment projections, January 19th, 2021. Awesome. Okay. So let me hide this thing. Let me hide this thing too. Okay. So anyway, this is my great pleasure to share with you the multi-year enrollment projections. I've been doing this for West Hartford for over 20 years now, I can safely say. I don't remember the exact number, but it's a lot. And I always like to start these enrollment projections with a sort of a historical look at where enrollments are, because I think that sort of puts everything in perspective. And so this chart shows you two lines. One is the solid blue line, and that's the total K-12 enrollment in West Hartford Public Schools from the 1947-48 school year, so right after World War II, up to the current school year. So over, almost 75 years worth of enrollment trends. And the purple line with the square dots on it is the change from year over year. And so the blue line goes to the left axis and the purple line goes to the right axis. So you can see the rate of enrollment, the baby boom is clearly visible here. We went from roughly 4,700 students right after World War II to peaking close to near 13,000 students. So during that decade of the 50s, enrollment was growing between anywhere, a good year was only 400 new kids in a year. And more typically you had 600 and sometimes you had 800 new kids a year. So that's just, opening 1 to 2 elementary schools every year just to be able to handle that growth. Then things had, stabilized in the 60s and peaked in the late 60s and then started to decline from, roughly the end of the 70s to the early 80s. And the decline was steep, but it wasn't as steep as the increase. It dropped only about 400 students a year. So again, they were losing 1 elementary school a year. And West Hartford went from like 15 elementary schools down to about 9 elementary schools at the nadir in 84, 85. And then since 84, 85 to the present, you can see what's called the baby boom echo. And that's been a marked increase from a low of around 7,000 students in the mid 80s to close to 10,000 students in the year 2010, 2011, and then it's dropped off since then. But you can notice that the increase was not nearly as dramatic. It would only grew by 100 to 200 students a year over that 15-year period, and it was a longer spread out growth. And now we're in that declining phase. Enrollments peaked in the 2010-2011 school year, and they are dropping now to under 9,000 students. And you can see that the rate of decrease has been relatively constant between 0 and 200 students per year, averaging maybe 100 student loss, except for this most current year, 2021, and we'll talk about that in a little bit. So in order to do the enrollment projections really follow a cohort of students through the school district. And obviously, the students start as kindergartners, and 5 years before they start as kindergartners, they start as births. So we track the births as that first primary input into the school system. And so again, you see 2 lines here. The black line on the left axis is the number of births that occurred to West Hartford residents. And the purple line to the right is the total number of Connecticut births. And you can see this great divergence in the Connecticut births as a whole peaked around 1990 at around 50,000 births per year, and it's dropped steadily every year. And it may be slowly holding off, but I'm not ready to claim that it's hit the bottom, to around under 35,000 students a year. Births a year in 2019, which is the most recent data that we've got. Whereas in West Hartford, that birth trend in the 90s continued to grow. We went from 600 births to a peak of 750 births in 2001 and 725 births in 2004. And since then, it finally has started to decline roughly the same rate as the state of Connecticut has. So that we're now down to around in 2019, it was a very low level of our lowest level of births in almost 25 years at around 535. So in order to project enrollments, we use what's called the cohort survival ratio. And the cohort survival ratio is just a simple mathematical concept, which is the ratio of the cohort of students as they move from one grade level to the next. So to give you some specific examples, in October of 2020, we had 620 second grade students compared to the previous year where we had 626 first grade students. So the CSR is simply 620 over 626, which is 0.9904. So we lost about 1% of students from first grade to second grade. In 2020, we had 633 sixth grade students compared to 664 fifth grade students. This CSR is then 0.9533. I point this one out because this is the cohort ratio. This is that fifth to sixth grade transition is the transition where we historically have had the lowest cohort survival ratio in the district. Significant, it's averaged, it's always been under 1 and ranged anywhere from 0.89 to 0.98 from year to year. This is the time when we obviously transition from elementary school to middle school. This is also parents make some decisions in terms of where the kids go. This is also a time where the spaces for enrollment in other schools, either private schools, parochial schools, or sometimes interdistrict magnet schools, expand for those students in that grade level. And then finally, when we talk about the cohort survival ratio for kindergarten, we don't have a complete census of the 4-year-olds. We only have so we've got this sort of 5-year gap. We got an excellent census from the Department of Health in terms of live births, and we have an excellent census on our kindergarten students. We don't know sort of what happens in that 5 years in between, so we have to take that 5-year gap. So we divide we had 562 kindergarten students in 2020. We use the birth year 5 year previously. Obviously, some kids come at age 5, some kids come at age 6, but it averages out over long periods of time. So that CSR is 562 over 575 or 0.9774. So those are the cohort survival ratios that we calculate for each grade level and also for each school, because we do this cohort survival ratio on a school by school basis as well. So what does this CSR account for? I mean, what are the things that are that's this one single figure accounts for? First of all, it accounts for families moving to West Hartford for schools. Historically, 2020-21 being, you know, a little asterisk next to it, we always had more kids and more kindergartners than births. We always had more first graders than kindergartners up through fifth grade. It also accounts for the families choosing to send students to private parochial or magnet schools, and that typically happens at that fifth to sixth grade transition, which we talked about previously. It captures the families coming / leaving to West Hartford due to economic reasons. We'll talk a little bit about that and what happened in 2009. And it also captures that turnover in the real estate market. There's a constant turnover of 500 to 800 houses in the real estate markets. Typically, new families come in, old families move out, or more elderly people move out. So that could be a net gain of students. So that whole CSR just sort of summarizes all of those trends. We don't model those trends individually, but just use that CSR to account for those trends. And it doesn't account for COVID-19. Okay, I'll just be brutally honest here. I don't have a good sense as to how to figure out whether, you know, we had 200 fewer students than were projected here as Liz discussed in the enrollment report that she gave in November. There is no, you know, and they're spread evenly pretty much across all the grade levels, a little bit more in the elementary schools, but, you know, mostly spread evenly. Don't have a good way to model what that impact is going to be. So we just enfold that model into our analysis, the actual results into our analysis, with that caveat in mind. So let's take a look at some of the main CSRs that we tracked. So the first one we talked about is that birth to grade K cohort survival ratio. And so this chart shows that cohort survival ratio with, you know, ranging from 0.84 to 1.14. The blue line is the sort of the 1.0 level. And this is the year of the October 1st year. So it ranges from October 1st of 2010 to October 1st of 2020. And you can see that in the early teens, you know, our cohort survival ratio was typically substantially above 1.0. Then something really odd happened in the 14, 15, 16 time period. And I spent hours and hours trying to analyze that, and then don't have any clear convictions. It wasn't, you know, we were losing kids to other types of kindergartens or anything like that. I think it was just the impact of the financial recession in October in 2008 and 2009, 2010. Families were born here, jobs weren't here, they moved away. So we had a substantially lower cohort survival ratio in those years. Then the economy recovered, and we get to our more normal sorts of cohort survival ratios around 1, a little bit higher than 1. Oops, hang on just a second. Oops. Sorry. Oh.
These are things that happen when you have an online board meeting as opposed to an in-person board meeting.
That is correct.
You gotta love it.
Sorry.
That is correct.
I had to take my computer to visit my mother and I forgot to plug it back in when I got back. So battery's almost running out.
At least you left us with a nice chart to look at. Thank you.
Okay. So sorry about that. Okay. So when I do the projections for what I'm going to use for my cohort survival ratio, I just take the average of the most recent 3 years. So I average the 2018, 2019, and 2020, and that performs the base. So it was about a little bit over 0.98. So we're going to lose about 1.5% kindergartners compared to births 5 years ago in these projections. Then we can take a look at sort of, I don't, you know, in the physical report, I've got every single chart. I'll be glad to answer any questions, but I didn't want to overwhelm the presentation with lots of charts. This shows that average of birth to K, K to 1, 11 to 12. So you can see the average cohort survival ratio for 2017 was a little over 1.01. 2018 was about 1.0. 2019 was about 1.0, and then 2020 came in a little around 0.983 or so, something like that. So that clearly is an outlier.
Hey, Chip,
Yeah.
I think your presenting didn't.
Oh, did it just
kind
did
of
it?
fell off.
All right. Let me just.
If you would mind just like resetting it or restarting.
Yeah. All right. Let me just go back to this. All right. All right. Let me start that baby up again.
Perfect.
All right. Can you see anything now?
Yeah, we're all good. We've got page one.
You've got page one. All right. So let me get up to page. All right. So we were there. So this, so clearly 2020 was an anomaly at around 0.985. The base projections for the next forward is an average of about 0.995. So those are what goes into those projections. And so I just want to take a little brief minute to talk about what my thoughts are on this COVID-19, how to factor this thing in. So the purpose of these enrollment projections really is twofold. One is to take a long-term look at the district enrollments and to see if you have enough capacity in the buildings to manage those enrollments. And so whether the average cohort survival ratio, we ignore what happened in 2020 or we included our normal way with the 3-year average, will have no impact on the long-term capital needs of the district. You clearly have enough space in all of the schools to meet all projected enrollments, because enrollments are still going to decline. It may not decline as fast as in this projection if all of a sudden kids come back, but they're still going to decline. The second purpose of the enrollment projections is to really to get a laser focus on what next year's projections are to help the Board of Ed make their budgetary projections. And so you're going to be using, this is just one of the components that go into those projections. And you will build in some flexibility in the budget in case students come back. But also, if students come back, they're going to come back spread over the entire district and across all the grade levels. So it's not going to be impacted in one particular grade level. So then we take a look at the overall enrollment projections over time. So it's this original slide that I showed at the beginning. Then with the 10 years added in the right of the chart, which shows the projections. And so we're going to be, you're right now at around 8876 students in K-12 in district, and it's going to drop to somewhere around 7,500 over the next 10 years or so, dropping around 100, 150 students per year. And you can see it's a gradual slow drop. There is sort of a sense that maybe we're reaching the end of the baby boom echo in the year 2030, 2031. We'll see. If you can ask me back in 10 years and we can see whether I'm right or not. But we're getting close to the end of that drop. More specifically, if you want to take a look at each of the enrollment projections in each of the schools, so this chart shows the previous 10-year history and then the 10-year forecast. The top line in red is the elementary, the middle line in blue is the high schools, and the bottom line is green is the middle schools. So if we take a look at the top line, which is the elementary schools, you can see the elementary schools peaked at around 4,700 students in the existing 11 buildings in the 2010-2011 school year. And it's been gradually dropping to just under 3,800 students this year. And it's projected to drop slowly, but continue to drop, but end up somewhere around 3,500 students in the out years. In previous years, I projected 3,600, 3,700 students. So whether it's 3,500 or 3,700 students, you're going to have lots of space available in the elementary schools. The bottom line, sorry.
Chip, if I could just about the elementary schools, do you want to explain how we used to add portable classrooms every year and the cost that went on? Because some people think like our baseline of elementary schools, well, we should move away, but we didn't just keep our baseline of elementary schools. We kept adding portables in the 10, 15 years ago. Go ahead.
Yeah. So if you look at this time frame here in the 80s, so at the nadir in 1984, you had 9 elementary schools opened. And then as that enrollment grew, and it grew first in the elementary schools, you opened up back Aiken School in 1990, I believe, and then you opened up Smith School in 95, 96 school. So those are two schools you added. In addition, we put enrollment additions at Aiken, Brayburn, Bugby, mostly modulars at Bugby. We've obviously built a brand new Charter Oak. We had portables at Duffy, though I think they're all gone, or are they still there? Modulars? Duffy, I can't remember. Morley is the one school that really wasn't impacted by this. Webster Hill had a big addition. Whiting Lane had a big addition and modification, and Wolcott had a big addition and modification. So there's a tremendous amount of money that was spent. And then we obviously added Bristow as a third middle school, and you had the two high school projects and additional some new classrooms that are added at Hall. So if I remember right, it's $200 million investment over 15 or 10 or 15 or 20 years in the schools to meet that enrollment growth from that nadir of 84, 85 to the peak in 2010, 2011. So the bottom line is the middle school line. So that middle school enrollment has been relatively stable at 2,200 for the last 10 years or so, and now is beginning to decline as that wave of enrollment changes that was in the elementary schools now hits the middle schools. And it's declined to somewhere around 1,800 in the out years. High schools are relatively stable at 3,000 students, but are going to begin to slowly decline in year 2 through year 6 of the forecast to around 2,500 students. So that completes the presentation. I'll be glad to answer any questions.
Great, thank you. Who has questions? I know people must have questions. So just to put a question mark in the chat box. Really? No one? Oh, Jason.
Hello. Thank you, Chip, for that presentation. I love graphs, so this was awesome. Let's see. So I had a couple questions. First is I'll say them all together, and then you can choose how to respond. So one is why are the middle school numbers lower than the high school numbers? I know that that the 5th to 6th is a transition period that you talked about, but just kind of curious, where did those other 1,000 students come from when they then appear in high school? And another is there a relationship between economic decline and opt-in for public education? Or if there's some other economic or regional variable that has been tied to projected enrollments, over your career of looking at this, be interesting to hear, what other things that we could look at besides births, and just keeping our antennas live for the kinds of changes that are coming to our state. And then the third one is just curious about the structure of the data you're using, and if there's racial composition figures that are a part of that, to see what those kinds of projections will look like for the district. Thank you.
Okay, so let me talk a little bit first about the middle school and the high school. So the middle schools and high schools are pretty similar in terms of the number of students per grade. So, I think you're quite, middle school is obviously a little bit lower because there are only 3 grades of middle school versus the 4 grades in the high school. So that's one of the biggest reasons. Historically, the middle school, you lose on average 5 or 6% from 5th to 6th grade, and historically we've gained 2 to 3% from 8th to 9th grade. So the kids leave for other middle school experiences and then return for our high schools. has been the standard practice. In terms of economic decline and opt out of public schools, I've done extensive analysis on that in the past. I didn't do it this year. My non-West Hartford, I don't have quite the same access to data, but let me talk a little bit about that. First of all, from a market share perspective, we have 89% or 90% market share. In other words, of the kids that live in West Hartford, their school age, 89 to 90% go to West Hartford public schools. So it's typically only 10% that go to non-public schools or non-West Hartford public schools or private schools. The biggest growth we had in that was from year 10 ago to about year 5 ago, as the CREC interdistrict magnet schools grew substantially. We were participants in the University of Hartford Magnet School way back in the 90s. We have students that go to the Greater Hartford Academy of Arts and Math and Science. There are other CREC schools that are now, they're all pretty much full-time. So we tracked those types of things. So that was a growth of students that went there, but that peaked at around 2010, 2011, 2012, 2013, if I remember correctly. I looked extensively, I alluded to the missing kindergartners that we had in the 2009, 2010, 2011 birth cohorts. I did an extensive analysis tracking every possible kindergarten because they report, all private schools report to us statewide what West Hartford residents attend their schools for kindergarten. We obviously have the interdistrict magnet schools, so I could get a complete, it took quite a bit of sleuthing, but I could track every single kindergartner in West Hartford, figure out where they went, pre-2009, post-2009, afterwards. And no, even in that great economic disruption, there wasn't a change in terms of what kids went to West Hartford, other than, the growth in the magnet schools issues. No, the change was people left. And then
before
in terms of
Chip, before you get to that, because I do want to touch on that, because this is something people always want to make this comparison, and it's fair to look at, okay, is West Hartford losing people? Real estate agents are concerned. Are we losing people? And they do comparisons town to town, which I'm fine with. I'd rather people do that than make assumptions. Oh, you lost 200 kids this year. Are people leaving West Hartford? That's not the right metric. You have to look broadly at Connecticut. 4 years ago, I was in a meeting with superintendents, maybe 5 years ago, with Governor Malloy at the time, who talked about this and the lower birth rates, and asked how many of you here, there were 36 superintendents, how many of you here have less students than you did last year? 35 of the 36 had less students. So we always have to look at that. And then you look at who's moving into West Hartford and when. And this is something that I'm just kind of fascinated about. And at some point, I'd like to look at it more. People kind of used to move in when they had their family to West Hartford. And now you see more people moving in before they have their family. That's just a kind of shift you've seen over the past few years, and families get smaller over time. So those are other things that Chip and I have had many discussions with. And Chip's search for the kindergartners is kind of our search for the 200 kids we've lost. And the fact is, if you talk to any urban superintendent in the country, they're saying the exact same thing. We've lost kids and we can't find them. And this, we've had this discussion already this year when Liz presented the numbers earlier. We've seen some people move out, and as Chip pointed out, this wasn't like, well, all our 8th graders left or all our kindergartners left. This is spread across the district and across grades. So that's another kind of sleuthing we've been trying to do, but it's not unique to us. This is kind of across the board. Sorry, Chip, go ahead.
Okay, and so Jason, just to get to your last question about racial composition projections. So the short answer is no, I don't do racial composition projections. Couple reasons. One is when you're doing, as I alluded to in the main report, the enrollment projections are best done at the gross level, the district level. And when you start doing it for a school, it's 1/11 of the school at the elementary, 1/3, 1/2, you just get less accurate. Same issue with the minority population. Asian students are 10%. Asian Black students are 10%. Hispanic students are 15%. Multiracial students are 4 or 5%. It's very difficult to get detailed types of projections at level. However, I do, historical, I've got all that data back for 20 years and I keep updating it every year. And so we used, the district, when I started in the district, we were, 20% minority students. And now we're 43%. And it was a steady growth of around 0.7% in terms of percentage of minority students, except for the last 2 years. It grew very slightly last year, and it actually dropped this year. So it'll just be interesting to see what happens in the next year. So no, I don't do any projections on those types of things for those reasons.
And truthfully, it was always kind of easy to project because it was always, we were so steady with that number of increase for years. And then last year, again, slow. And then this year, that slight loss. So it's kind of, no 1 or 2 years can be a blip. You don't want to make a trend out of something, but it is something certainly we're curious about.
Thank you, guys.
All right. Amanda and then Liz.
Hi, thank you. So Chip, you worked in the district a long time and you've seen a number of different towns change over the years, thinking of, like a Canton, Farmington, Manchester, where they may have made adjustments over time to reorganize the grade levels at each building. So, thinking about if they have, a 1 through 3 and then a 4 through 6, or some towns have one building was all 6th grade. These enrollment projections and the relative facility planning and usage are based on our particular organization, which is the K through 5, 6 through 8, 9 through 12. Have you had conversations over the years about what this data looks like when the grades are reorganized? I don't want anyone to panic by me asking that question because we love our neighborhood schools, but this is our job and it's important that we ask these kinds of questions. So I guess I'm wondering if those conversations have been had over the years, and if you've run this data differently with different grade configurations.
So the last big grade configuration change that was done, and I guess to preface, those are board policy decisions. Those are not things that are generated by myself. Those are generated by board policy questions, and they tend to resolve around both educational goals and then space needs. So there have been 2 major changes in West Hartford. The first major change was in the 1970s when the high schools finally started emptying out, and they went from the junior high school model with a 7-9 to a 10-12 high school to a 9-12 high school. So I think that, if I can, I was a kid back then, but looking back at some of the data, that was driven by availability of space and a desire to change it to a 9-12 model from an educational perspective. The second big change that was done in the district was again driven by space needs, was the switch from K6, which was prevalent through up to 1988, and then they added the middle school teams, and they made the middle schools, instead of being 7-8, they made them 6-8. And again, that was dictated by some space considerations as they were trying to figure out where we're going to put all the kids, type of thing. So those are the primary drivers of grade configuration changes, is a combination of a shift in a policy decision in terms of how you would like to educate kids, combined with a space needs situation. And when I was there between 1995 and 2019, I don't recall any discussions of changing the grade configurations. The big change was adding a smaller middle school because the enrollment was just too big for the 2 middle school building. Was the big change that happened during my time frame there.
So from a data standpoint, when just running charts and reports, it would be possible to take the data that you have available to you in some scenario and organize it under different grade configurations. Because then if we're looking at the facility plans, I'm in strategic planning and I love facility management. So this is where my head goes. So if we're looking at, what we have available and, how are we using those buildings under different situations, then how hard is it to, I imagine it's difficult, but how much work is it to look at this with different,
If one of the key drivers, Amanda, of that, typically when you look at the elementary levels, is also there's different code by grades for kindergarten with bathrooms. So anytime you shift to that kind of a model, to be honest, most districts that do that build a new building when they do it, because the retrofitting of buildings towards pre-K. So that's the other thing to look at when you're looking at building space in the district. One of the things that I think it's incumbent on all of society and towns and districts is to really look at how can those spaces be filled with pre-K and universal pre-K, universal public pre-K, which is something that's been a goal of mine. If you had asked me when I became superintendent, I would have said by this year we'd have had that. And then we've had enough things get in the way that hasn't been possible, and budgetary drivers that have made that possible. But that's the kind of look. So it's not just doing the math, it's actually the facility report, and then the retrofitting facilities that becomes a really difficult piece of that too. And as you said before, you're changing the entire model from a neighborhood school-based system to a tiered system. But it's not impossible. It just, that would be a heavy-duty lift of a report to you. That would be an outside consultant, architects, and everything else to do that kind of report, rather than us just putting it forward.
Okay, thank you. And I'm not suggesting that we do that.
No, I know. No, it's incumbent on all of us to look at the future and what does it mean.
Yeah, and I'm just making that clear. I know you know that, but just for anyone listening in the public, I do think at some point that has to be some long-term work, just so that it's something that is being looked at.
Yeah, the difficulty with all of our long-term planning, as we know, and Chip said this in the off years, is when we're talking about 2027 in the elementary schools in 2028 and 2026, those kids haven't been born yet. So we're making educated assumptions about that, but we've seen shifts over time. And as we say, we're seeing the flattening of the decline over time too. But yeah, absolutely. There's nothing, we've talked about this. We talk about it all the time about what's the right size and how do we look at things and how do we look at the size. And that's why, we're now completing the downsizing of Bristow from what it had been, because we had those spaces at the middle school and that made it more appropriate levels and more efficient staffing. So we've done some of that.
Liz and then Mark.
Yeah, I was looking at your charts for specifically the elementary schools, and I noticed that some of the elementary schools are hit harder with this declining population than others. And I was wondering if you foresee a point in time that we don't need to be operating with 11 elementary schools.
That is a board decision.
But number-wise, is there a year that you say, "Oh, I think that we have enough space"?
That's that's really a board question and a policy decision in terms of how many elementary schools you want to run and what financial pressures you're responding to.
And I also
your elementary school, there are elementary schools in the state of Connecticut that have 50 kids in them. And, so those are very small. So
the other thing is getting a real read of how much savings you get from closing an elementary school, and what that means versus changing neighborhood structures, closing a school, and what that means in terms of investment. People typically overestimate the amount of savings you get from closing a school. When you look at the savings you save on custodial staff and maintenance, although you have to increase some in other places, they get bigger. You save on administration costs, but you don't really save on teacher costs, as those teachers are now just spread, teachers that are there are spread in other places. And you have some electrical savings and things like that. And if you can sell that building, the difficulty, in all honesty, is the town made some decisions about building it sold, moved away from in the past, and then needed new buildings in the future, or worse, needed portables. So what I always say to people is, and I think this is important because you weren't on here then, we've cut 32 elementary school classrooms, and we've taken those portables off buildings in different places. So in effect, we've closed a school. As far as the savings you get over time, taking away those 32 classroom teachers, taking away those portables that tend to be energy hogs, and making our schools smaller. Whereas we're not going to take all of them off, because it doesn't make sense economically to take off a perfectly good, modular classroom that's attached to a building that we just spent $400,000 on a decade ago. So it's one of those questions that people ask, could you, the answer is always going to be yes, because you look at what the size of the district was previously. Yes, you can move away. You could close middle school, you could close elementary school, you could close a high school. You just need to make everybody fit into that new place. So does it come to the point where I'd recommend closing an elementary school, looking at the numbers? Not in the next couple of years. When you look at, we're kind of flattening where we are at the elementary school. And if you go to our elementary schools now, I don't think you walk around and look and go, wow, this place is empty. For the most part, you walk around and think, okay, this is what it is. And there's some places where we're still, basically filling those classrooms. So it's a good question. It's an absolutely fair question. So I'm not saying that at all. And it's a board question. If that proposal, you ever want to go forward with that proposal, we can go forward and look at the numbers for it. So it's just, we do that kind of cycling through over time.
Did that answer your questions, Liz?
Yes, thank you. Yeah, just another comment just to follow up is, I was doing some math on it, and so one school specifically comes to mind. It was not too far in the future, down to about, if you just divided it up, and I know it's not going to divide up perfectly, the number projected by the number of grades winds up like about 40 kids per grade, and so that's, I think the class sizes were going to be like 14 or something like that.
That you can't do the average class size based on that, because we make the class size based on the number of kids in that grade. So you can't do projections of average class size in a building in advance, because if there are only 28 kids in a grade, yes, then we have two sections of 14, but it's way more likely that there's 36 or something. And then the other piece of that is, if we do only have 28 in a grade, and it's one of our many schools that accepts open choice students, we can accept 12 open choice students, and now you have 20 kids in two sections. So that's the other flexibility that this gives us. Whereas we don't, and we can certainly do a presentation on open choice and how we receive funding from open choice and what it equals. We don't typically accept students to push us over so that we have to hire another teacher, but we do use open choice to smooth those gaps that we see over time. So that's just another tool that we have when we move kids in.
Okay, thank you.
Yep.
Mark, and then Lorna.
Hey, Chip. I actually don't have a question for you. I just wanted to say good to see you and Happy New Year. It's good to hear your voice and see you.
Oh, Mark, thank you so much. Wonderful to be back in this Zoom setting.
Well, that was easy. Lorna, you're up.
Thank you. Hello, Chip, and nice to see you as well.
Hi, Lorna.
I understand and recognize and respect that with your presentation and giving projections and also giving factors that impact those projections, how COVID-19 was not taken into account. So I understand that you acknowledge that. However, if I may ask, in your professional opinion, in recognizing the impact of COVID and certainly the impact on families and their financial status and how that may impact the decisions they make down the road, do you foresee possibly that having a significant impact on projections down the road?
I'm going to punt on this one. I'm going to say yes, but I don't know which way. I mean, I can make anecdotal discussions about, okay, well now everyone can work remotely. Okay, so if you're raising a family and you can live in Boston, you can pay $600,000 for a 1,500 square foot ranch with no basement, or you can work remotely in Hartford and you have to drive up to Boston once or twice a month. And for $600,000, you can get a wonderful house with a great school system. Yeah, I can talk that there'll be a lot more people coming into West Hartford, into the system. Or you can say, okay, well, now everyone's sort of scared. They're really, they're I still don't understand where the 200 kids went. I mean, and I'm just still, and it's a statewide issue. I just don't know where those kids went. So I don't know why they left. So it will impact it, but I can't tell you whether it's going to be whether it's a one-time blip, whether it's start of a new longer trend and people are just going to go, Connecticut's just too densely populated, they're going to go out to the middle of nowhere. I mean, I can talk, or they're going to say, oh no, Connecticut's a very, very reasonably priced real estate market. I can work remotely here. I can, leave my Silicon Valley, where for $1 million I get, a 1-bedroom apartment, or I can move out here. I can talk myself into almost any possible thing, and that we'll have a better sense on or about October 15th of 2021.
Fair enough. Thank you. So it sounds as though West Hartford is not an anomaly with this experience, that there are other districts that are also questioning the same, possibly.
Yes.
Thank you.
Any other questions? All right. Well, thank you so much. It was a pleasure having you back.
Pleasure to be back.
Thanks for taking some time for us, and we'll move on. Thanks for your report.
All righty. Bye-bye.
All right, we are moving on to routine matters and the financial report. The approval of the financial report for the period ending November 30th. I will provide the financial report. Do we have before I do we have a motion to accept?
So moved.
Thank you, Mark. And a second?
Second.
Anyone? Who was that?
Liz Wilcox.
Thank you, Liz. Great. And now discussion. I will thank you, Liz, for putting that up on the screen. So as you can see, this is the financial report for the period ending November 30th. So it encompasses about 3 months of the school year, the first 3 months. Right now, we are projecting a small surplus of about $117,000. Might sound like a lot of money, but on a $170 million budget, that isn't a lot of wiggle room. So here we are. We can go ahead to the next page. There we go. Thank you. When you look through the general fund report, you'll see there are a few changes from the last report. You'll see a negative balance on the principals and assistant principals salary line, and a surplus on the department supervisor line. Again, this is because we have several department supervisors serving as principals and assistant principals this year, and so that that is the reason for the difference in the salary line items there. Under librarians, again, as we indicated last time, we do have some vacancies in librarians. Every school has school librarians, but we have a couple of vacant positions. We have a couple of vacant maintenance positions as well, which is reflected in the line maintenance regular. And we have some savings in paraprofessionals, but extra under contractual and professional services. The professional services are because we've had to bring in some folks contractually who are here just for a short duration, so it wouldn't make sense for us to hire on permanent staff members. If I remember correctly, those people are one psychologist, one special ed teacher, and 2 paraprofessionals that we've brought in from a staffing corporation. So that kind of takes us through the general fund report. We can move ahead to the grants accounts page. We have a couple of special grants that we have received, as have other school systems, due to the pandemic. We have the ESSER grant, which stands for, I can't remember what that stands for. Emergency.
It's elementary and secondary emergency relief.
Thank you.
Close.
Yep, something like that. We got $902,000 from that. That's a federal grant. We have until September 30th of this year to spend that, but we expect to spend that out by the end of this school year. We also have the Coronavirus Relief Fund grant. That was $1.2 million. That's fully expended. We have a little bit of extra time on our grants that was granted to us by the feds. But we're not going to have any trouble using all of these grant funds for the purposes that they need to be used for. Moving ahead to special funds report, we really don't have any changes to note here. Obviously, we are not doing many facility rentals this year. There's just not a lot to talk about under special funds. Nutrition services is really where the story is for us this year. As you all know, this is a fund that in prior years had been in the negative. We've worked really hard with Tim Krasinski and his team to get nutrition services working in a way that keeps us in the positive. And this year, it's just, we're not able to get there. And the reason is that we just aren't selling enough meals. So the story really is under average student lunches. So in November of 2019, on an average school day, we sold 3,443 lunches. In November of 2020, on an average day, we sold 1,569 lunches. So under half. And so that volume just isn't there. We're doing a little bit better than we were doing in September and October, and that's because for the month of November, we had all the elementary school students in all the time. But we are showing a projected operating income loss of $334,000 or so. And just as a warning, this will likely, this loss will probably increase over the next couple of months. So if you were thinking about our surplus and all the wonderful things we might use it for, we really do need to shore up our nutrition services account. So we will be lucky if we can use the surplus to get close to breaking even on that. The other thing I just want to mention as part of this report is that Congress passed legislation back in December, a new coronavirus relief package that included funds directed towards schools. However, we do not yet know how much we'll be receiving, and we also don't know what those funds will be targeted towards. So there'll be more to come. Hopefully by next month, we'll have some more information on what those new funds will be for. So that is my report. And thankfully, Liz is here to answer any questions. Does anyone have any questions?
The one thing, Deb, that I do want to stress as we go into the budget time is those funds. One thing that's very definitive, and there's 4 block areas that they're in, is that they are meant to supplement, not to supplant spending. So you can't decide, well, we're cutting this money from the budget and using this, because they're meant to pay for all of the things that have had to be put away in a variety of buckets because of COVID. So that's a discussion as we move into the budget cycle also.
Thank you. I think that's a really important point and generally is true of grants, but good for members of the community to know that these funds that are coming in are meant to supplement because we have extra costs. So that is and the goal is to get us in full time. That's the goal. Are there questions or comments? Liz.
I had a question about the on the general fund report, the unused sick leave at retirement. Is that to be paid this year, that amount?
That is an estimate of the amount that may be paid based upon how many of our employees elect to retire this year. So we generally have, I forget the exact number, Rick. I don't know if you can talk a little bit about attrition and how many people we normally have retire, but it includes all of our teachers and any other staff members who elect to retire at the end of the school year.
Yeah, we generally get about 20 to 25 retirees a year, Liz. Last year, we had far fewer than that. I think we were at like 13 last year, but I think this year we might spike back up to normal.
And just as a follow-up, sick time can accrue for your whole time of employment?
Yeah, so you can accrue up to 187 total days, a teacher can, and they'll be paid out half their unused time up to 45 days. But that benefit was eliminated back in, I want to say 2014. So anyone hired after 2014 no longer has that benefit.
Rick, I was just going to ask that question about, because I remember that being part of the contract.
Yeah.
But I didn't realize it was grandfathered in for previous. I thought it was part of the negotiations for the teacher's contract, not for new hires. But I guess I must be wrong.
Yeah. So we grandfathered everyone in, and it just applies to new hires. But I bet we have, 300, 400 new hires that are covered under that new benefit. And we've eliminated that benefit from all of our collective bargaining agreements. So so we have 12 bargaining units covered under the Board of Education umbrella, and this benefit's been eliminated from all of them.
So I don't know if you know this off the top of your head, but what is the average that you're paying out to somebody at a dollar amount?
So for a teacher, which is our highest paid, most highly compensated group, administrators as well, but we don't have a lot of retirements there. But a teacher averages about $22,000 paid out at retirement.
Okay.
Thank you. Amanda?
I'm sorry, Amanda, before you go, I just did want to clarify that the budget that you see for unused sick leave assumed total retirements of about 45 individuals. So as Rick said, there were teachers involved, but we also have secretaries, custodians, other staff members, et cetera. So I didn't want you to leave with the impression that that was for 25 teachers. It includes all personnel. And the budget was for 45 people. I'm sorry, Amanda.
No, that's okay. It was a good question, and I'm glad to get more information about it. How are we doing with subs, paras, TAs? I'm wondering from a coverage standpoint for the kids, but also how you see those costs being controlled, or what are your anticipated, what are your expectations for that moving forward? Is that getting any better?
So from a cost standpoint, I'm sure we are probably saving money in that line item, unfortunately. So it is better, to answer your question, Amanda, but it's still, every day is a struggle. So we did a lot of hiring over the break. We brought in a lot of college-age students. But we are, since the break, we're averaging 50 to 60 absences a day. And the last few days has been it's been tough the last couple of days with a lot of COVID related absences occurring. So, I mean, today alone, I think we quarantined 30 staff members throughout the district. So that has an impact certainly in the building. So we are managing, but it's not perfect. We have coverage. We have everyone in the classroom, but we're moving a lot of folks around within the building to make it happen. So it's a lot of hard work on behalf of our administrators every morning, and certainly our teachers who are, you know, when they have a free period, are picking up another class and things like that. So everyone's helping out, and we're doing our best to make sure our kids have a qualified teacher in front of them every day.
And from a financial standpoint, at this point, I do anticipate that we may have some savings in our substitute line. However, at the time this report was done, you know, it was November, still a little too early to see really what the effect would be and the success we would have in getting more subs coming in. But that will be updated each month as we have more experience with our actual results.
Other questions or thoughts to share? Okay. If not, I will, we have a motion on the floor to accept the, to approve the financial report for the period ending November 30th. It has been moved and seconded. I will try your minds. All those in favor, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed, say nay. Any abstentions? The ayes have it. Thank you. And thank you, Liz. Moving on to approval of the minutes, seeking a motion to approve the minutes from the regular Board of Education meeting from December 15th, 2020. Is there a motion?
So moved. Amanda Aronson.
Amanda, is there a second?
Second.
Thank you, Lorna, for seconding the motion. Is there any discussion on the minutes? If not, I will try your minds. All those in favor of approval of the minutes from the December 15, 2020 board meeting, please signify by saying aye. Aye.
Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed, say nay. Abstentions? And the minutes are approved. Thank you. Moving on to information and reports. Board members, communications and reports. Are there reports from other boards and organizations? Other information and discussions. Okay, and non-staff communications and reports, reports from our student board representatives, and we will start with Rochelle this time.
Hello, everyone. I'm glad to be here, and it's great to see everyone's faces. As previously mentioned in this meeting, yesterday, January 18th, was West Hartford's annual Martin Luther King Day celebration, where a number of community leaders and students celebrated the life and work of Dr. King with a theme centered around where do we go from here. I would specifically like to shout out Conard's Solo Choir for their powerful performance during the event, and I would also like to recognize Conard student Taylor Santana for her inspiring speech at the event. Winter sport practices that have been improved have begun this week, as well as course selection for Conard students has also begun this month. I would also like to announce Conard's musical for this year, Little Woman. More details regarding the event will be announced soon. Conard recently had their January Chieftain Award celebration, where students were recognized by faculty members from each of the different subject areas and had a meeting. All the Chieftain Award students had a Google Meet celebration. Lastly, Conard's National Honor Society PJ Day raised approximately $1,600, which is almost 4 times the amount raised last year. Thank you.
Thank you. Lily.
Hi, everyone, and Happy New Year. Throughout the month of January, Hall has been preparing for and transitioning into the second semester. So course recommendation and selection for next year are underway right now, this week, last week, and next week. And senior portraits are wrapping up in the upcoming weeks. As Rochelle mentioned, winter sports began today, with the exception of cheerleading and wrestling, which were not cleared by the CIAC. And although indoor track can't have any meets this year, basketball, boys swimming, and hockey are all scheduled to have a 12-game season. Yesterday, many Hall students participated in West Hartford's celebration of Martin Luther King Jr. The Hall Coraliers and the Concert Jazz Band both performed, and Megan Rodriguez-Hawkins was the school's student speaker. The program can be found on the West Hartford Community Interactive website. And thank you so much to those students for their contributions to that really, really awesome program. And finally, this isn't specifically related to Hall, but I just really wanted to share this. West Hartford Public Schools as a whole raised a record-breaking $22,820 for Connecticut Children's during PJ Day this year. So thank you to everyone who organized and participated in that event.
That's awesome. Thank you for sharing that. I was going to ask if anybody had that information about how much we raised as a district. So thanks for everyone who contributed. And thank you for your reports. Future business. We have 2 upcoming meetings in February. The first will be Tuesday, February 2nd, 2021, right here on Google Meets. This will be a regular meeting, including the adoption of the capital improvement plan, which we discussed this evening. The second meeting in February is on Wednesday, February 17th. And that is also a regular Board of Education meeting at 7 p.m., likely to be here on Google Meets as well. Are there any requests for future agenda items? No. Are there any visitors who have joined us who'd like to make comments at the end of the meeting? I see no one new has signed up on our form, but if you are a member of the community that you'd like to address the board, now is another time that you are able to do so. Okay. Before we close out, I wanted to thank Paul Vicinus for his service in the National Guard this weekend. Thank you so much. Also to wish a very happy birthday to our colleague, Liz Wilcox. Thanks for sharing your birthday with us this evening, Liz. We do not have an executive session, so at this time, I will seek a motion for adjournment.
So moved. Lorna Thomas Ferguson.
Thank you, Lorna. Is there a second?
Second, Liz Wilcox.
Thank you, Liz. Without further ado then, and without objection, the meeting is adjourned at 9:03 p.m. Thank you so much, everybody.
Bye, guys.
Happy birthday, Liz.
Thank you.
Happy birthday,
Thanks, guys. Thank you.
Good night, everyone.
Good night.